And what do you think the future is? I don't know how much you can talk about DNA Fit specifically or in general terms. What's going to happen next for DNA testing?
So I think it'll become much more widely available. So you'll find out that more and more people are aware of it, because obviously the issue we have now is that people aren't necessarily aware of it, and it'll become cheaper as well. And then you'll be able to test for more variance or more variation between people. So you'll be able to have reports for how well you respond to psychological stress, for example, which will be really useful. You can probably get personalised skin care products, which again will be useful for some people.
Yeah.
You can find out how likely you are to suffer from the placebo effect, not suffer from, but be susceptible to the placebo effect. So if you're a chronic pain person, could a doctor just give you a sugar tablet, for example? One of the biggest hurdles for genetic testing in general is kind of the ethical considerations around it. And they kind of haven't been figured out entirely properly by kind of the government and things like that. So if you have a genetic test, like who owns your information, if the company tests you, do they have to give information to the police if they have a warrant for that information, for example, all those kind of things. So that's one of the things we're trying to do at DNA Fit, is kind of lead the field on the ethical side of it, and we work very closely with a number of bioethicists to make sure that we're on top of the game. We're the only genetic testing company that's got a code of practice, which means we kind of have these things published so we can hold ourselves accountable to them. So we're really trying to sort of bring the field forward in that regard. But yeah, the ethical considerations of it are going to be quite big in the next sort of 5 to 10 years. That's something you see a little bit more in the US, where the ethical considerations are a bit more important. So if, for example, an American football player has a genetic test done, does he have to give that information to the club that employ him? And if he does, what can the club do with that information? Because what you don't want to happen is that a player doesn't get a contract because he's genetically predisposed to having a higher risk of injury, for example. That would be the incorrect way to use that information. Just because someone's got a higher risk of injury doesn't mean they will get injured. It means that you want to be proactive in your injury prevention work. So it shouldn't be used to discriminate against people. It should just be used to give a guideline for various different training things. So that's probably kind of the biggest hurdle in regards to genetic testing over the next 5-10 years. But the field will move on fairly rapidly as the cost comes down and people are much more aware of it.
Yeah. Have you heard of a company called Helix?
Yes, I have.
So I think, are they storing all the DNA information about an individual that it can then be disseminated in different ways? I mean, I'm not sure. I think that's, I don't know too much about that, but do you know anything?
Yeah, you're more or less right there. So Helix are going to have an app store model. So you'll pay for a genetic test through Helix, and they'll test you for around about 800,000 SNPs, which are the genetic variants that we're interested in. And they'll store that information, and then you can kind of log into a store and purchase different products based on that. So that might be a DNA Fit product. It might be another company's product. So, for example, on their store, they're going to launch with a company which will genetically match which wines you should be having based on your genotype. Now, what the evidence for that is, I don't know. That's just but it's definitely on the store. So you kind of have that information to use it a bit more. And that's kind of where it's going, a bit more kind of entertainment based, making genetics really interesting for people, getting them involved in kind of doing the testing. So yeah, that's kind of Helix's model.
Yeah. I mean, it's caused a little bit of a consternation in the market, hasn't it? As to, you sort of touched on the research element of it, but it's going to be interesting times the next 5 to 10 years, I think, in the whole personalisation space. And I do believe anything that empowers the individual to learn more about how they respond to things, whether it's exercise or diet, to get familiar and in the habit of doing things like a finger prick blood test every 3 months, which is what we do. We have a baseline, and every 3 months we test for those 6 things I mentioned. We wear the wearable tech, so I'm tracking my sleep, I'm tracking my activity, and I'm tracking my recovery, which is what I wanted to talk about next, actually, because that's what I'm really interested in. So I've gone through the process of overtraining, getting fed up with my training, getting diminishing returns, taking a break, coming back in, and I'm pretty good now at feeling what the balance is between enough physiological stress, so that's work and training in a physical sense, and balancing that with good recovery. And the DNA Fit report has helped me to do that. When you were, you kind of alluded to this, but when you were competing, how much priority was there put on recovery? Because I think we've got better at that. Am I right? from an athletic
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, no, you are right. So we definitely had a lot of kind of information about what the best way to recover was. So we kind of had the ice baths that we could use. We had sports massage and sports medicine that could look after us around that. And we were given kind of lifestyle advice as well. Obviously, they can't make you do those things when you're away from the track. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of information around that. So for me, I would kind of train later on in my career. I kind of train from 10 a.m. till kind of 2 p.m. Have a couple of hours in between, and train again from perhaps 4 or 5 p.m. for another couple of hours, and then I just kind of go home. And my focus was just on recovering as well as possible. So I would kind of cook a really nice or good meal with all the nutrients that I required. Do some stretching later on in the day, which I found was really good at helping me relax. And then I would kind of just go to bed and then try and get as much sleep as I thought I needed, which was probably about 9 hours a night. To be honest, when it comes to recovery, the simple things are the ones that make the biggest difference. So you definitely have to sleep as much as you can and as much as you need, which for an athlete I found was about 9 hours. Now I'm not an athlete. I find I'm fine on 7.5 hours. Any less than that, I kind of struggle. So definitely nailing the sleep and then just nailing the nutrition around the kind of sessions as well. And when I say nutrition, what I really mean is what foods are you eating. Again, there's kind of like, you see it in athletics primarily, but it's also in the general public now, is this obsession with kind of what supplements do I need to have in order to do this? Does this very obscure amino acid have this effect? Really, what you want to focus on is, am I eating foods that support my goals? If my goal is to lose fat, am I sort of consuming slightly fewer calories than I require? And are those nutrients matched to my DNA? If your goal is to build muscle, am I consuming slightly more calories than I require? Is that food of sufficient quality to enable me to A, train really hard, and B, recover? So have I got enough micronutrients around that? And am I consuming sufficient protein? If most people sorted that out, they'd probably feel much better. And then once that's in place, then you can kind of look at things like ice baths and massage, which really are just the icing on the cake, really.
Yeah. I mean, I think sleep is absolutely the most important. We call it the force multiplier. We have a concept called, a trademark methodology called the 6 signals. So they are sleep, mental health, body composition, energy, digestion, and fitness. And all of those 6 things are intertwined. So each one affects the other, and in an ideal world, all 6 of them would be in balance. Invariably, that's not the case, and that's why people come to us, and it's something that we all struggle with on a fairly daily basis. Normally something slightly out of kilter. But sleep, I believe, is the force multiplier, because if that's not good, and when I say good, you're getting the right quality and duration of sleep on a regular basis, it's very hard to affect a change in body composition for the hormonal disruption that can be caused there. Very hard to get the satisfactory level of fitness. Very hard to have good mental health if you're sleep deprived, and so on. So I really think sleep is the most important if you're going to be able to affect those other 5 signals. And completely agree on food. I think whether you're trying to gain muscle, lose weight, or just for most people, it's about energy. I don't have enough energy to do what I need to do at work and at home. And the recovery. I'd be interested to know what sort of recovery protocols you would recommend for the busy professional, rather than the athlete.
Yeah, I guess it depends again what their kind of overall lifestyle stress is. So when their training session sort of fits around that. But really, what I would generally recommend is that often you just think of recovery as that time period that happens after training until some arbitrary point later in the day, whereas recovery is kind of all the time. So you're always, if you train more than 3 times a week, you're always recovering from those sessions. It's an ongoing process. And you can set the scene for recovery before the session happens. So people just start thinking of recovery as soon as the session finishes. That's too late. You should have been thinking about it beforehand. Research is really good that if you have protein intake before training, that increases the muscle protein synthesis after training to a greater extent than if you just take the protein after training. So it's just about being consistent. So it is protein with every meal. In my opinion, that is vegetables with every meal as well, which obviously makes breakfast a bit weird. You've got to get protein and vegetables in there. But if you don't want to be tied to the Western invention of cereal or something like that, and you're happy to have a stir fry for breakfast, which some people do, that would help you hit that goal. It would be a case of having some understanding of how recovered you are, and so that can impact whether you train today or whether you have a slightly easier day, or whether you do something to improve that. So that might be heart rate variability, might be some sort of questionnaire that just takes a minute to do. Then you can go and do your training session after work perhaps, and then you might come home and then you have to set the scene for getting a good night's sleep. So that could be loads of different things depending on how much time you've got. You might have some time to do some bit of stretching. You probably need sort of 10-15 minutes there. You might do some sort of mindfulness practice. You might have a hot bath, for example, all those things. You would probably want to avoid any stimulating activity for about an hour before you go to sleep. So that would be computer games, scary TV shows, getting your phone, things like that. So what I try and do is go to bed an hour before I want to go to sleep, and then just read for an hour. So it's a good time to have kind of get your thoughts in order, and then wind down, and then just try and kind of make sure your sleep environment is good for what you want to achieve, which is getting a longer period of sleep. So you don't want any light in that room, so you want to have good curtains or blinds, blackouts if possible, or use an eye mask, like blackout blinds better. Sound can wake you up as well, so you might want to have earplugs if you're a light sleeper. Having a bed which is comfortable to be in and big enough, so if you sleep with a partner, for example, if your bed is too small for both of you to fit in there, then you're going to be hitting each other, or the other person turning over the night is going to wake you up. That's going to disturb your sleep. So probably the third most expensive thing I've ever bought in my life, I bought a house and a car, was a mattress. So I decided I'd spend about a third of my life in bed, so I should spend a lot of money on a mattress.
Yeah, completely.
And buying a mattress honestly changed my life. The other person that I was sleeping with didn't wake me up at all in the night. There was no physical contact after the point at which you went to sleep, which meant that I wasn't getting disturbed. They could get up and move around without the bed shaking. So it does make a massive, massive difference. So if you have got the ability to kind of spend money on that kind of thing, you should. And then same for things like duvet, pillow, covers of those. You want to be as comfortable as possible in your bed, essentially. If you could set up that environment, because you spend a third of your life in that environment, you probably want to spend some time making sure it's right. If it is right, then you'll get your sleep much better. And if you sleep much better, the cycle continues and you recover much better from your various different stresses.
Yeah, completely agree. There's a really good book I read about, it's called Sleep by a guy called Nick Littlehales. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, no, I've read that. Yeah, it's a very good book.
Yeah, it's good. It's only a small book. It's bang full of tips. Another good one called Sleep Smarter by a chap called Sean Stevenson out in the US. That's good as well. Yeah, it's a good one. Sean, SHAWN Stevenson. Again, we'll link to it in the show notes for listeners. But I got quite a few things from that. One of them is the use of topical magnesium to aid recovery, muscle soreness, but also it's involved in about 300 plus biochemical processes in the body. And one of those is that it can aid sleep, it can aid feelings of calm. So I put that now on around the shoulders and chest, and also on the major muscle groups of the legs, so hamstrings, quadriceps, calves. And that's just become part of my little nighttime routine. And I got that from Sean Stevenson's book, so there were a couple of good reads for sleep. Just want to come back to a couple of things you said. You mentioned mixing protein with vegetable for breakfast, and you mentioned stir fry. But I guess eggs with vegetables would work. Eggs with and I put my morning vegetables in a smoothie. Kale, spinach. I put a banana in as well. Chia seeds, coconut water, maybe some nuts, possibly a little bit of spirulina. So you can also, I think, when I talk to people about the DNA report, and there's often an increased requirement for antioxidants, sometimes an increased requirement as well for cruciferous vegetables, which is your broccoli, cabbage, kale, etc. And there's a kind of look of, well, how on earth am I going to get 8 or 9 of those into a day? But you can put 3 or 4 of them into a morning smoothie, blend that up in the NutriBullet, drink it. It's actually a filling breakfast, particularly if you twin it with eggs, so you get that protein. And that's near enough half of that daily requirement done in one hit. So it's doable. It's definitely doable. The other thing I wanted to pick up on, you mentioned heart rate variability. Can you just talk a bit more about what that is and how you use that?
Yeah, so heart rate variability kind of looks at the variation between beats of your heart. So the greater the variation, the greater the parasympathetic nervous system dominance is. So the greater the parasympathetic nervous system dominance is, the kind of more relaxed you are really. So you want to have a higher number there overall. So there's various different methods you can use. Obviously the most precise method is to wear a chest strap and then measure that kind of 5 minutes continuously after you wake up. That's impractical for most people. So I've got an app called HRV for training on my phone, which basically uses the camera. So you put your finger over the camera on the back of your iPhone, the light comes on, and the camera can measure heart rate or with your heart beating in your finger, and it gives you a score. And the higher your score, in theory, the more recovered you are. So it's really good. I used to use that in the morning. Some caveats around heart rate variability. It appears to be most accurate for people involved in endurance or aerobic training. It appears to be slightly less accurate for people involved in speed or power training. So for a sprinter, for example, it might not show the same trends as you would expect to see. So a really good example of that is that I used it for a little bit in 2011, and on the day that I had my worst ever heart rate variability score, around my fastest 100 metre time for 3 years. So obviously not necessarily much correlation there. But it's good just to kind of get an idea of where you are, and if my score is really low, then I might have an easier day. But it's essentially just a nice way for me to be aware or a bit more mindful of how I might feel and then make changes based on that. Some really good research recently which shows that if you're an endurance athlete and you change your training on a daily basis based on your heart rate variability score, you'll see greater improvements in your performance than if you just do a standardized training program. So you can use heart rate variability day to day to determine, is today a day that I train very intensely, or is a day today where I train with less intensity but slightly more volume? And that seems to be really, really helpful. So it's kind of early days, I guess, with the heart rate variability aspect of it. It's not as important for me as kind of more subjective markers, which is how I feel, or things like that. But a lot of people do like it, especially if you're really highly motivated and you one of those type A personalities who just train hard or work hard all the time until you basically blow up. It can be a good way to get some early warning signals in there and enable you to take steps to ensure you recover before something bad happens.
Yeah, I agree. So the wearable tech that we have gives it does look at heart rate variability as one of its inputs. It also looks at resting heart rate, body temperature, pulse waveform, and I use that as a gauge to steer. Is it a good day to push? Is it a good day to try and build in a few more breaks? Take it easy, strip a few things off the to-do list, and just get a better balance for the day. And it's how we advise clients as well. So okay, you've got this busy day, you've got board meetings, you've got calls, you're back to back. Your readiness score is low, or your heart rate variability is low. Sometimes it's kind of, well, what use is that to me? Because I've still got to do this day. And sure, you still do that day, but perhaps you can get up 10 minutes earlier, do a little 10-minute meditation sequence, walk an extra, to get off the train, to stop earlier and walk, just to get a bit of movement through the body. Try and get some natural light throughout the day. Try and just get yourself a 5-minute break where you can be on your own. Just helps to understand it. What else? What are the small things? Comes back to those marginal gains. Small things that I can build into this day to try and cut myself a bit of slack because I haven't slept as well as I'd like, or I'm not as ready for this volume of work as I might like to be. And I think heart rate variability, and there's many ways you can do it, is another just a good little feed in to try and take away some of the guesswork around how the body's feeling and how best to respond to that.
Yeah, and also just to identify trends as well. So it may well be that on a Tuesday your heart rate variability score is much lower than it normally is. Well, you're probably doing something on Monday which is causing that, and that's consistent. So try and find out what that is. And if you can remove it, remove it. If you can't, try and take steps to offset that so that you're much more consistent across the week. So yeah, it's like collecting data is really useful if you can then analyse that data to see if there are any trends. If there are any trends, take steps to improve that.
Yeah. And I think what's going to become more and more popular, as well as the personalisation theme, is intelligent training or an intelligent lifestyle. By that I mean, I often come across type A's who are very, very under-energised, extremely stressed, still doing lots of HIIT workouts because they think that's what they should be doing. In actual fact, it probably isn't what they should be doing all the time anyway. But balancing that high intensity with moderate intensity, like brisk walking, and then some low intensity exercise that's more restorative. And I think with a lot of the technology and the intersection of science and technology, it's going to be easier for people to understand and monitor what's going on in their bodies and responding accordingly. And then the challenge for someone like, for a coach, is how to actually get that person to recognise you don't need to keep smashing it. actually the intelligent way of doing this is to take your foot off the gas and balance out other areas of your life. So that's our perennial challenge, and we enjoy it. We're coming up on time, Craig, and I want to be respectful of that, but am I right in thinking you're writing a book?
Yeah, well, yes and no. So I have written a book
Right.
about how you might use genetic testing. It's just currently kind of going through copywriters to see if it's worthwhile publishing, and if it is, taking it the next step. But
Right.
yeah, basically I wrote it to help people, because what we typically find is that people do a DNA fit test and they find they have a lot of questions after that, and they don't necessarily always know exactly how to take that information. So I just wanted to sort of put together a resource to try and do that for them. So give them more information and send them off in directions which they can go and research for themselves. So yeah, we're kind of just putting that together now. So if it is going to get published, then it will get published hopefully fairly soon. If it doesn't, then we'll probably try and make it just available to DNA fit customers once they're genetic test them.
Yeah, great. Well, keep you posted on that. I'll be really interested, and we can help you promote that as well. Last thing, have you got any other tips that you would give for busy professionals where time and energy are their precious commodities? We've talked about quite a few things, but any other insights that you can give the listeners on how to balance a busy lifestyle?
The main thing is that people just think everything's really complicated. So they think that they have to understand sleep, you have to read 10 books, and you have to follow these people on Twitter and read their various different blog posts and their articles, so you can fully understand it, and then you have to spend a lot of money on various different things to understand where you are right now and do that. In truth, what we typically see, or what is most important, is just the simple things, the basics, which really make a big difference. So if you just hit the basics, you're probably not doing it already, so you will feel much better. If you get the sleep that you require overnight, you'll feel much better. If you eat foods which you know are good for you, and it's not like, if that's vegetables and that's fruits, that's some protein, that's some carbohydrate, for some people not too much, that's some fat. If you eat that in a sufficient quantity, again, you'll feel really good. And it is doing exercise. And if you do exercise, again, you'll feel really good. And then once you've got those basics in place, you can take things to the next level and try and get into them a little bit more. I think a lot of people are put off by making changes because they think they need to understand everything they're going to do down to the lowest level, whereas really they just need to kind of get the basics right and then find somebody else, in this case perhaps you, to enable them to understand the differences that they can make in other areas a little bit more. And once they make those differences, again, they'll feel hugely better.
Brilliant. Yeah, great advice. You can be found on Twitter at Craig100M, so at Craig 100 metres in essence, but just an M on the end. I had a look at your website, craigpickering.com, and I saw that you'd issued a list of books that you read, which was a really interesting list, actually. It's a combination of kind of true life crime, books on psychology. So I saw Tanya Byron's book, The Skeleton Cupboard, which I loved as well.
Yeah, really good. I read that today. It was so good. I couldn't stop reading it.
Yeah, really good, wasn't it? So definitely recommend that to anyone who's got an interest in psychology and just somebody's interesting life story, really. But there are also a lot of books there on health and fitness, so I definitely point people towards that website and have a look at Craig's reading list. So craigpickering.com. Craig, thanks very much. It's been a really, really interesting discussion.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, pleasure. Well, link to everything in the show notes. And perhaps, we do a part 2 further down the line when the field's moved on a little bit more. And of course, if your book gets released, let's have you back on to talk about that as well.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Great. Thanks very much, Craig. And thank you all for listening. Thanks for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, help us to reach more people by leaving a rating and a review on iTunes. We would really appreciate that, and it would help us to spread the good word even further. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you on the next show.